Picture this for a second. A single missile launches from Iran, and American radar systems track it perfectly, calculating its trajectory, preparing interceptors, everything working exactly as designed. But then, at a specific altitude, something happens that changes everything. That one missile doesn't just fly toward its target, it breaks apart into dozens, maybe even hundreds of individual warheads, each one capable of destroying its own target, each one requiring its own interceptor to stop it. In the span of 3 seconds, what started as one defensive problem becomes 200 defensive problems. And the mathematical reality of that equation is something the Pentagon has been desperately trying to avoid talking about publicly. This isn't some theoretical future weapon or science fiction scenario. Iran has been developing cluster submunition missile technology that fundamentally breaks the economics of missile defense. And they've reached a point where $1 million Iranian missile could require $500 million worth of American interceptors to stop, if you can even get that many interceptors in the air fast enough, which you probably can't. Welcome back to War and Wealth. Before we dive into why this technology essentially checkmates decades of American military planning, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell right now. This is the kind of military development that changes everything overnight, and you need to understand it before it shows up in tomorrow's headlines. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never look at missile defense the same way again. To understand why cluster submunition missiles are such a game changer, you first need to grasp how current missile defense systems actually work, because the entire architecture was built on assumptions that this technology completely shatters. When a traditional ballistic missile is launched, defense systems like Patriot, THAAD, or Aegis detect it using powerful radars that track its speed, trajectory, and probable impact point. The defensive system then calculates an intercept solution and launches one, or typically two, interceptor missiles to destroy the incoming threat before it reaches its target. This works reasonably well when you're dealing with single warhead missiles, even sophisticated ones. The interceptors are expensive, sure, around $4 million each for a Patriot PAC-3 interceptor. But if you're protecting a critical military base or city, that's considered an acceptable cost. The entire system is built on the assumption that each incoming missile is one target requiring one or two interceptors to defeat. But cluster submunition technology breaks this entire model in ways that are almost embarrassingly simple once you understand it. Instead of carrying a single large warhead, these missiles carry dozens or potentially hundreds of smaller submunitions, each one essentially a mini warhead capable of causing significant damage. During the missile's flight, at a predetermined point, usually during the descent phase, the main warhead section opens up and disperses these submunitions across a wide area. Think of it like a deadly shotgun blast from space, except each pellet is a guided warhead that can adjust its trajectory to hit a specific target. Suddenly, your defensive radar isn't tracking one object anymore, it's tracking a cloud of threats, each one requiring individual attention from your defensive systems. The mathematics of defending against this are absolutely brutal. And this is where Iran's strategy gets genuinely brilliant in its simplicity. Let's say Iran launches a missile carrying 100 submunitions. Traditional doctrine says you need to fire 2 interceptors at each incoming threat to ensure a reasonable probability of destruction. That means you need 200 interceptor missiles ready to go immediately, just to stop that one initial launch. But here's where it gets worse. A typical Patriot battery has 32 ready interceptors. And even if you have multiple batteries defending a location, you might have perhaps 96 interceptors available in total. You're already outnumbered 2 to 1, and that's from just a single Iranian missile. If Iran launches 5 of these simultaneously, which is entirely within their capability, you're looking at potentially 500 incoming warheads versus fewer than 100 interceptors. The math simply doesn't work, and everyone involved in missile defense knows it. The cost equation is even more devastating than the numbers game, and this is what keeps defense economists awake at night. Building a missile with cluster submunitions isn't dramatically more expensive than building a traditional ballistic missile. Iran can produce these for perhaps $1 to $2 million each, using technology that isn't particularly exotic or difficult to manufacture once you have the basic missile technology, which Iran has had for decades. But defending against it requires hundreds of millions of dollars worth of interceptors, assuming you even have them available. This creates what military strategists call an unfavorable cost exchange ratio, a polite way of saying the enemy can bankrupt you by forcing you to spend hundreds of times more on defense than they spend on offense. It's the same principle that made the Soviet Union realize it couldn't match Reagan's Star Wars program. Except now the equation is flipped against the United States. The technology itself isn't new, and that's part of what makes this so frustrating for American defense planners. Cluster munitions have been around since World War II, and the basic concept of multiple warhead missiles dates back to the Cold War with Mir-V technology on nuclear ICBMs. What's new is the application of this concept to conventional regional ballistic missiles, the miniaturization of guidance systems that allows each submunition to be independently targeted. and the proliferation of this capability to nations like Iran that previously lacked such sophisticated systems. The components needed to build these weapons have become increasingly available on the global market, often disguised as civilian technology or acquired through complex networks of front companies and intermediaries. Iran's specific implementation of this technology appears to draw from multiple sources and represents years of indigenous development combined with foreign assistance. Intelligence assessments suggest they've studied Chinese and North Korean designs, potentially received technical assistance from Russian engineers, and incorporated commercially available components from various international suppliers. The result is a weapon system that may not match the sophistication of American or Russian equivalents, but doesn't need to. It just needs to work well enough to overwhelm defensive systems, and by all indications, it does exactly that. The targeting challenge these weapons create is something that deserves special attention because it reveals just how completely they break traditional defensive concepts. When a cluster missile disperses its submunitions, each warhead follows a slightly different trajectory, spreading out across an area that could cover several square miles. Your defensive radars suddenly have to track, prioritize, and engage dozens of individual targets simultaneously, each moving at hypersonic speeds during the terminal phase. The computational load alone is staggering. Defensive systems that were designed to track and engage maybe a dozen targets simultaneously are suddenly confronted with 10 times that number. Even if the computers can handle it, which is questionable, the mechanical systems certainly can't. Interceptor launchers can only fire so fast. Guidance radars can only illuminate so many targets, and the entire defensive network gets saturated almost immediately. The area effects of these weapons create another nightmare scenario for defenders. Traditional military planning assumes you can identify critical assets that need protection and concentrate defenses around them. But when submunitions spread across a wide area, they threaten everything within that zone simultaneously. An airbase that might have seemed adequately defended against conventional missiles suddenly faces the prospect of simultaneous impacts across runways, fuel depots, ammunition storage, command centers, and aircraft parking areas. Even if you stop 90% of the submunitions, the 10% that get through could still cause catastrophic damage across multiple critical systems. It's like trying to protect an entire city with an umbrella designed to cover a single building. Real-world testing of defenses against cluster submunition missiles has produced results that nobody wants to talk about publicly, but leaked assessments paint a grim picture. In controlled exercises where defensive systems knew exactly what was coming and when, success rates against cluster submunitions were dramatically lower than against traditional single-warhead missiles. When you add in the fog of war, the element of surprise, and the stress of actual combat, those already disappointing numbers get even worse. Some estimates suggest that current defensive systems might stop fewer than 20% of submunitions from a well-executed cluster missile attack, though official sources refuse to confirm or deny these figures. The implications for American bases across the Middle East are staggering. Every major U.S. installation in the region, from Al Udeid in Qatar to Prince Sultan in Saudi Arabia to Al Dhafra in the UAE, was designed with the assumption that missile defenses could provide adequate protection against the limited number of ballistic missiles Iran could launch. That entire defensive concept is now obsolete. If Iran can turn each missile into dozens or hundreds of individual warheads, every American base in the region becomes vulnerable to saturation attacks that current defenses simply cannot handle. This doesn't just affect military planning, it fundamentally undermines the deterrent effect of American forward presence in the region. NATO allies are watching these developments with growing alarm, recognizing that the same technology that threatens American bases in the Middle East could be used against European targets. The missile defense architecture that NATO has spent billions developing, particularly the Aegis ashore systems in Romania and Poland, was designed primarily to counter Iranian ballistic missiles. If those missiles now carry cluster submunitions, the entire European missile defense strategy needs to be reconsidered. The possibility that Iran might share this technology with other adversaries, or that other nations might develop similar capabilities, independently adds another layer of concern for European security planners. The response options available to the United States are limited, and none of them are particularly attractive. Developing new defensive systems capable of handling cluster submunitions would require years of research and development, plus hundreds of billions in deployment costs, money that would have to come from other defense priorities. Increasing interceptor production sounds logical, but runs into industrial capacity constraints. The factories that produce these sophisticated missiles can't simply double or triple output overnight. Preemptive strikes to destroy Iranian missiles before launch is theoretically possible, but would require starting a war that nobody wants and might not even succeed, given how well Iran has learned to hide and protect its missile forces. The diplomatic implications of this technology are already reshaping Middle Eastern politics. Countries that host American bases are reassessing the risks and benefits of that relationship. knowing that they could become targets for weapons their defensive systems can't stop. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have notably increased their diplomatic engagement with Iran in recent months, potentially seeking to avoid confrontation rather than rely on American defensive guarantees that may no longer be credible. This erosion of confidence in American security assurances could fundamentally alter alliance relationships that have defined regional security for decades. Private defense contractors are scrambling to develop countermeasures, seeing both a massive problem and a potentially lucrative opportunity. Concepts being explored include directed energy weapons that could theoretically engage multiple targets quickly, hypervelocity projectiles that cost less than traditional interceptors, and electronic warfare systems that might disrupt the submunitions guidance systems. But all of these remain largely theoretical or in early development stages, years away from operational deployment, even under accelerated timelines. In the meantime, the vulnerability remains, and potential adversaries know it. The psychological impact of this capability shift cannot be underestimated. American military personnel stationed at bases within range of Iranian missiles now know that the defensive systems they've been told would protect them might be essentially useless against certain types of attacks. That knowledge affects morale, retention, and the willingness of service members to deploy to these locations. Family members back home are increasingly aware that their loved ones are serving in locations that can't be adequately defended, adding stress to military families already dealing with the challenges of deployment. Intelligence agencies are working overtime to understand exactly how advanced Iran's cluster submunition capabilities have become, but the challenge of assessing foreign missile programs has always been difficult. Unlike nuclear programs that require specific materials and facilities that can be monitored, developing cluster submunitions uses largely dual-use technologies that are harder to track. A facility producing ball bearings for industrial use could also be manufacturing submunition components. Guidance systems designed for civilian drones can be adapted for military purposes. This ambiguity makes it nearly impossible to know exactly how many of these weapons Iran has produced, or how sophisticated their latest variants have become. The proliferation risk of this technology extends far beyond Iran. Once a nation demonstrates that cluster submunition missiles can defeat advanced air defenses, every country seeking asymmetric advantages against more powerful opponents will want the same capability. The technical knowledge is already spreading through academic publications, international conferences, and the movement of engineers and scientists between countries. North Korea, which has extensive missile cooperation with Iran, likely already has, or soon will have, similar capabilities. Other nations, from South Asia to South America, are probably taking notes and adjusting their own missile development programs accordingly. Market forces are already responding to this new reality. Defense stocks focused on missile defense systems have seen volatility as investors realize the limitations of current technology. Companies working on next-generation defensive systems are seeing increased interest and investment. The insurance industry is reassessing the risks associated with facilities in the Middle East, potentially making it more expensive to operate in the region. Oil futures have begun pricing in the possibility that critical energy infrastructure defended by these newly vulnerable systems could be successfully attacked, adding a risk premium that consumers will ultimately pay at the pump. The strategic implications extend to America's global military posture beyond just the Middle East. If relatively inexpensive cluster submunition missiles can neutralize billion-dollar defensive systems, the entire concept of forward basing that underpins American military strategy needs reconsideration. The ability to project power from secure bases has been fundamental to American military superiority since World War II. If those bases are no longer secure against nations like Iran, how does America maintain its global military presence? These aren't questions with easy answers, and the Pentagon is undoubtedly conducting classified reviews of global basing strategy in light of this new threat. China is certainly taking notes on how cluster submunition technology could complicate American military planning in the Pacific. The same weapons that threaten bases in the Middle East could be used against American facilities in Japan, South Korea, and Guam. Chinese military publications have already discussed the utility of saturation attacks against American bases. And the successful development of cluster submunition capabilities by Iran provides both technical insights and political cover for China's own programs. The possibility of facing similar threats in multiple theaters simultaneously creates planning nightmares that current American force structure simply isn't designed to handle. The timeline for addressing this vulnerability is measured in years, not months, which creates a dangerous window where American forces and allies remain exposed. Developing new defensive technologies, testing them thoroughly, manufacturing them at scale, and deploying them to threatened locations is a process that typically takes a decade or more. Potential adversaries know this timeline as well as Pentagon planners do, creating a period of maximum danger where the threat exists, but the counter doesn't. How America and its allies navigate this vulnerable period without either suffering catastrophic losses or being forced into preemptive action will be one of the defining security challenges of the next several years. For those of us watching from the United States, This isn't some abstract military problem that only affects people in uniform. The credibility of American security guarantees affects everything from global trade patterns to the value of the dollar to the price we pay for imported goods. If America can't defend its allies and interests abroad, the entire international order that has provided decades of relative stability and prosperity begins to unravel. Understanding these challenges isn't optional for informed citizens. It's essential for making sense of the policy choices and trade-offs our nation will face in coming years. This technology changes the game in ways we're only beginning to understand, and War and Wealth will continue tracking these developments as they unfold. If this analysis helped you grasp something that seemed complex or overwhelming before, share this video with someone else who needs to understand these realities. The mainstream media tends to oversimplify or ignore these technical military developments until they result in crisis. But understanding them in advance is crucial for anticipating what comes next. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think the solution to this challenge might be. Is there a defensive technology that could restore the balance? Or does America need to fundamentally rethink its military strategy? Your perspectives and questions help shape our coverage, and some of the best insights come from our comment section discussions. Subscribe if you haven't already, hit that bell for notifications,